Welcome. This is Sarah Marie, and you are listening to Time in the Studio, where we help earth-loving creatives to dig in and flourish. I'm an artist, herbalist, and postpartum doula based on the unceded territories of the Arapaho, Ute, and Cheyenne nations, also known as Boulder, Colorado. And I like to give thanks for this land, for the people, for the plants, and the animals who came before. I also want to send out some love to those impacted by the current fires in Boulder, Colorado, and to the situation in Ukraine and to refugees everywhere. One huge thanks to Aaron Travers for the show music and a little bit about this episode. So this interview was such an honor to create. It features one of my all-time favorite teachers. I took a class with this person about 20 years ago, and I always signed up for any class that I could take that they were teaching. I always learned a ton about writing, literature, myself, the world, and teaching from every session. And this interview follows that same trend. So I think you're going to get so much out of this. We get into innovative teaching techniques, whether you're in person, online, or it's recorded, and ways that you can structure your group offerings with people. He also talks about taking time to create your teaching materials and allowing things to kind of marinate so that you can create more depth in your offerings. We also get into teaching pedagogy and how to be a better speaker and keep your audience captivated. I didn't want this episode to end. It was so wonderful to catch up with Bryan. So let's get into it. Imagine yourself sitting around a fire with us and gazing up at the stars. Here we go. Cha-cha-cha. Wow. Bryan Hull. I took classes with this wonderful human. Maybe that was 20 years ago?
20 years ago, yeah.
Yeah. And he was a life-changing teacher. So I was able to take some writing courses. I was also really lucky to go to Italy and study in Florence and study film as literature, which was so phenomenal. I also got to take an Indian literature course. And I love the way that you really push people to write in a way that's true for them. And I feel like you really encourage people to get into the depths of who they are and to be true to themselves and to express themselves with a little more oomph and courage and bravery. And I love the way that you taught. It was always different than other teachers. And so I'd love to get into a little bit of your practice because I'm just seeing more and more creatives, healers, herbalists that are looking for various ways to share their work with the world and to connect. And I'm finding writing and teaching are two primary ways to do that. And teaching online is especially challenging. And so I feel like if anyone has figured out some little ways to make that more effective, you may be the one. I'd love to know a little bit more about, let's just dive in. Where are you at? What's going on with you, Bryan Hull?
When you say teaching online, are you talking just Zoom or are you talking about asynchronistic as well?
I think asynchronistic as well. Selfishly, I'm starting to teach some classes that are going to be in person and online. It's happening simultaneously. And then I've also been in multiple courses that have kind of a balance of both of those things. So I think both are applicable. It's all
Okay.
applicable. So
Yeah. I think it's the first thing that I would have you or anyone do is think about the limitations and the strengths of whatever medium you're teaching in. And I don't know how much news you listen to, but a lot of the news is about, oh God, like classroom teaching is where it's at, and teaching over Zoom is horrible. And I don't know, I think we forget the challenges that were present in class, like brick and mortar teaching. And so it's just important to think about what does this medium give you and what are its challenges. And the other day I was thinking of all the irritating things that happen when you're teaching face to face that I don't have to deal with over Zoom. So for example, like the two students who through the entire term, no matter what you say or do, they're going to chit chat while other people are talking the entire term. And it drives you crazy. And that doesn't happen over Zoom.
Yeah.
Like
I can't.
people don't have side conversations in Zoom mostly. I mean, and I was thinking of all the things. I was like, oh, well, that doesn't happen. That doesn't happen. Like active shooter drills don't happen when you're on Zoom. It's fantastic. Like I don't have to like get on the ground with my students. So, but I think the biggest challenge about one of the biggest challenges about Zoom teaching is it's easy for students to do something else while they're supposedly engaging with you because you're at the computer, so you can, if it gets even a little bit boring, you can check your email. Or there's a ton of students who play computer games while they should be paying attention. And
Wow. Yeah.
so how do you, I think the mistake that people make in teaching Zoom is it's not interactive enough. Like from experience that I'm a pretty interactive person face to face, but I think in Zoom it's like super essential. And there are a million different ways to be interactive with Zoom other than breakout groups, which is kind of what people default to. And you just have to think about, since you're focused on creative people, they have to be very creative with the medium. And just like, when we were doing face-to-face classes, I would think, okay, we're in one room. What can we do with this room to really push it to its limits? So once when you and I were doing the Indian Lit class, I remember I did this get on the bus where I had people do 2 rows, and it was a bus, and then their partner was the person across from them, and we moved all the chairs and we formed a bus. And that was to like get out of rows and get out of little cliques that had formed and get out of people's comfort zone by stretching the limits of the room, right? So you have to do the same thing with Zoom. Like, how can you push Zoom and make it do things that you have limitations, and I think any artist knows how to work the limitations of the genre you're in. That's why sonnets are both difficult and exhilarating to work in, because there's so many constraints. So for example, I'm just going to give you some examples of things you could do.
Yeah, I love it. Thank you.
So sometimes I have students, like I've picked partners for them, and I tell them what the partners are in the chat. And then I say, okay, we're not going to do breakout rooms. You're going to chat with the person whose name you see. So everyone's doing individual chats simultaneously while we're all in the same space. And it's just something different. Something else I do is if you don't use the chat in a very conscious way, then people tend to take it over and do their own weird stuff in the chat. I don't know how many things you've been over Zoom, but people will like, I don't know, they do all this weird stuff. Like they have to let people know that they're there. So they say, and there's all this stuff that is just like fluff. And I'm like, I want the chat to be a place where people are learning. So I may say like, okay, do something and then put whatever you're doing, show me what you're doing in the chat. And so they'll show a sentence they are revising in the chat. And I can instantly tell by looking at the sentences how many people have the concept down or not. So it becomes like a blackboard in a weird way. The whiteboard in Zoom is kind of awkward to work with, but the chat is, you can still look at people while they're putting in their sentences. So it's stuff like that, but engaging, the most important thing is just, I think people like PowerPoint's always difficult, but doing there's so many people that just share the screen and then do their PowerPoint. And I think that's the killer right there.
Mhm.
Because you're not engaging people. So the concept, one of the things I want to talk to you about is like to think about what you like. Let's say that I don't know, tell me a course that you're thinking of teaching. What would be on?
Well, I'm teaching a course on digestive health, like nourishing your gut to improve your immunity and health.
Okay.
And I'm teaching it as a one-off class to see kind of how it goes. But
Mhm.
as I'm working on it, I'm also realizing like, my God, I have 20 pages of notes already and I've only just begun. Like I think I want to do maybe develop it into like a longer course where I could work with people and they could kind of experiment with trying out different things with their diet and
Mm,
keeping
mm,
like a food journal and just experimenting with their own bodies and their own diets
mm,
and
mm,
to
mm.
have like a continuous check-in
Yeah,
and
yeah,
experiential learning and kind of
yeah,
engaging people
yeah,
and making it a little bit more interactive.
yeah. Your instincts are all good because the point I was going to make is what can you provide students that they can't get by just typing things in Google?
Mhm.
What Google gives you is information, but what you just listed are a bunch of things that Google can't do. Like you're providing like there's no way that I'm gonna get to do a journal and then also go through that experience of doing a journal about what I eat with Google. It's impossible, right? No one cares. There's no human on the other side, you know? So, but if you'd had that, I would immediately want to do that in your class because it's taking me through a process with you and then also with the group. And it's structured and it's moderated, and you can kind of do some things like a little bit like that with Facebook, but you have to think about what Facebook can't do that you can provide, you know?
Mhm.
So that's
Mhm.
what I would say is I think some of the mistakes that I just went to this workshop. It was god awful. It was about queering the classroom. So the title was
Mhm.
pretty cool. But
Yeah.
then the person, they were going over things that you could just so easily Google. Like they're like, okay, so let's go through the alphabet of LGBTQ, blah, 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 blah. I was like, and it wasn't just a quick thing. I was like, oh God, like we can figure this out on our own. Like it doesn't matter, like I'm here with a bunch of teachers and like let's use us, like
Yeah.
what can we provide each other? And
Yeah.
so that's I would say is very important. And it sounds like you have thought it through enough to know what you can provide your students.
A little bit. Yeah. I mean, I think it also it is a challenge because I think, there's so I have different impulses. Like I would love to have a class that people could just watch that's pre-recorded, that it doesn't have to be live. I don't have to be there for. And then I also would love to have like group classes where it is more interactive and have that
But you can do
help
both. And then
people.
in fact, I have classes that are both of those things. With COVID,
Mhm.
they're like, you have to be flexible with your students. And I'm like, okay, I'll have a dual structured class so that if
Mhm.
you can't make Zoom, if you get COVID and you're out a week, the the curriculum is there asynchronistic. Like I have lectures that are recorded that you could watch. So it's like you could go this way or you could go this way. And it's because I teach totally online that I have all that material that I can put in the class.
Mhm.
But you see how that's really useful. So
Yeah.
have material that is just asynchronistic and then have material that you would use for Zoom and then mix it when appropriate. Like
Yeah.
you can still do the dietary journal in a totally online class.
Yeah,
And
that's
people
true.
can post like, how's it going? Like, I totally didn't pay attention to my journal this week or whatever.
Right. Cool. Yeah, I like that. That's helpful. I'm wondering too how you think about structuring a class for a whole semester. So I haven't talked to you much in the last couple of years. So I don't know if you know, like I got the chance to teach. I was teaching art classes and I have stopped because I was getting paid, but it was very little. So I
Yeah, it felt like volunteering.
it felt like volunteering. So I've kind of like put that on the back burner, but I do love teaching. But I just was curious how you think about like a whole semester. So I'm kind of thinking of just wondering how you create like outlines for yourself for the semester and then also for the day, like planning. How do you plan a class? Like it gets overwhelming to me.
Okay. So now this is where it gets back to what you said at the intro. Your brain works in particular ways that are distinct to you, and you need to honor how you create a class based on how you like to work and how you like to create. And it's not going to be the same as me. So, for example, I take a really long time, I do it in bits and pieces. Say, I just revised an international studies class that I taught in the fall, and I spent, so the course was already there, but I was making it better. And I spent like a year and a half working on it a little bit whenever I felt like it.
Mhm.
I'm not a kind of person that likes to just sit for 12 hours and pull like do a ton of work. I can't do it now for a lot of reasons, and it's not how I ever worked. But some people do. I watch them. They get coffee, they get food, they just sit there and they just go at it. So knowing your creative process is really important. And I also, the way I work is I tend to perfect some initial modules, and the stuff at the end is really kind of fuzzy and not at all thought out. And I need to get some stuff pretty close to being done before I can move on. But that's me. I don't think
Mhm.
necessarily, I think some people are very methodical. Like they do week one, it's done. They move to week two, it's done. That's not, I do like 3 weeks because they interact, right? So I kind of want to envision the first 3 or 4 weeks and get that vision before I can move on. It just depends on how you work. But something else I want to say that I really, 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 really believe is something that the internet doesn't often give is depth. There are a lot of really short articles that don't say a whole lot, and even a lot of relatively short podcasts that don't get much depth. And so I think what you should ask yourself is, how can I give a certain level of depth in my class that I'm constructing that students will not be able to get anywhere else? And they'll be drawn to taking a class with you because they'll know instinctively, I'm getting something from Sarah that I can't get anywhere else.
Mhm.
So the Indian Lit class that you took, I had spent years doing reading that would never appear in that class, but it gave me a certain breadth and depth that, so when I came up with a connection or a theme, I knew it was valid because I wasn't just looking at the works that we were going to read. I was looking at all these works we weren't going to read. And
Mhm.
so I sort of, the prep I do is to get to the point where I say, I now have the depth I need to teach this subject. So for example, I do this unit on farming in Ethiopia, like, and
Mhm.
why they farm the way they do. And I had to do a lot of reading just to get to the point where I was like, I think I understand. Now, do I understand it like an Ethiopian would? No. But do I understand it better than most academics in the US? Probably, especially at a community college. And so there's a point I just read and think and listen. And then there's a point where something clicks and I'm like, I know this now. and now I can create the course, or now I can create this module. Does
I'm
that make
curious.
sense?
Yeah, that totally makes sense. And I can feel how that definitely comes through in your teaching. Like when we did the film as literature course in Italy, I mean, there was just so many cool, rich examples and just beautiful films we got to watch and cool exercises, like writing down our dreams and then having dialogues with our dreams. And there was just this depth of experience that you could feel coming through in the lectures or the I didn't feel like it was lectures, like it was lectures, but it also felt more like a conversation. Like
Yeah,
it
yeah,
always felt like there was a call and response with you and the students. Like it never felt like just a monologue. It was always you
yeah, of
engaging
course.
with people and seeing what resonates.
Yeah. But you have to get the depth. And so, in your own practice, I mean, you're trying to do many different kinds of things in your life. So that's hard, but there are areas that you know pretty well, either from experience or reading or trial and error or whatever, And so, and you also know the things you don't know that well. Like you're kind of skating on the surface. And I would spend the time learning more about the stuff you feel like you're skating on, because that they can get elsewhere,
Mm-hmm.
you know.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's helpful just to think of cutting away the pieces that feel irrelevant or that aren't your zone of genius. Like I got to see you have a couple YouTube videos now of some of your classes, which I was like, oh my God, that's so fun. But there was one of you kind of working through editing this paper and just showing what worked and what didn't work. And I think that was helpful for me to think of for editing the podcast too, because I think
Yeah.
sometimes I get into like I don't want to kill my darlings. I just want to leave everything there.
Oh no, yeah, yeah,
But
yeah, yeah,
you have to
yeah,
edit.
yeah. You have to edit, and so beyond that, everything does have an inherent structure. So a course has an inherent structure that the students need to feel sort of unconsciously, like you won't ever bring your, like you won't say this is my structure, but it'll be, they'll know if it has one, and you have to figure out. A lot of that comes from trial and error. Like you'll teach a course and you'll be like, they really need to know X before we dealt with Y.
Mm-hmm.
Like you'll know it from like that didn't work. So I do a lot of sentence structure work, and I not only know what level to do which sentences, but I also know this is what's likely to happen when I teach this. Like I'm going to have to come back to this concept several times, because probably the first time they're not going to get it, because it's new. And I don't know if you've experienced this with humans and learning. When you first introduce them to something new, they default to the thing they already know.
Mm-hmm.
It's not what you, it's like, no, I don't want you to think about it that way. I want you to think about it in a new way. But they
Mm-hmm.
go to the default, and it's a very, at first I was like, well, this is very frustrating, like, but I think you have to just say, okay, unless they're just inherently like geniuses from the gate, they're going to go in this direction. Then what can I do to have them practice so that they can come over and really do something new? Like think about a situation that's new. That there must be equivalents, like digestive and eating and herbalist. There must be predictable things that people are going to say or do
Yeah.
when you give them something new that isn't really what you like. No, I don't want you to go down that path. I want you to go down this path over here, because this is new and fresh, and this will take you to a new spot.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I feel like I had a consultation, an herbal consultation with somebody yesterday, and I could just tell I just asked her like, what do you normally eat in a day? What does that look like? And I could just tell she was saying what she thought I wanted to hear. And it was definitely not what she actually eats in a day. And it was, that's not what you're eating. But the whole, and what do you think I should eat? And like, I don't
Yeah,
know,
yeah,
just tell me what you ate and then we can go from there. And I think it is hard for people to just break out of that and to try new things. And
yeah, yeah. And your audience is that's very like yes, like given typically who would show interest in your topic, stereotypically, I would expect people to want to do the thing that they think that you want rather than just like gender wise, not what's the breakdown of women versus men in your class?
in in the class that I'm taking or in teaching,
In dealing with this topic, how many people are women and how
oh, it's probably, yeah, probably 80% women.
right? So like not surprising, right? So a guy, I mean, I guess there's some guys who would try to like tell you what you wanted to hear, but mostly guys are just gonna say this is what I eat,
Yeah.
like, and they're gonna be more, whereas women are gonna try to, for whatever reasons, like say the pleasing response. So that's something you have to, that's distinct to your target audience.
Yeah.
Good luck.
Thank you. I mean, I think part of it is just releasing guilt and shame because I think that's a huge part of why people say what they're trying to please you because there's a sense of guilt about what they've been eating. And I'm like, just don't feel guilty about what you're eating. Like, it's fine. It's just acknowledge where you're at. And then you can always add in some more vegetables or add in some
Yeah,
more
yeah,
something else that's good for you.
yeah, yeah. And lack of trust too, right?
Yeah.
Like this gal isn't gonna really understand why I eat what I eat, you know, which is hard. Yeah, it's interesting. I think money, people do things with money that it's like I have a friend and he's like, why are you acting the way you are about money? Like, why don't you do this and this and this with your money? And I'm like, oh, come on now. Do you think it's like because there's a whole history of each person has this long history about money and they're gonna do what they do because of tons of things that have happened to them. Like you could just,
Yeah.
it's like it takes a long time to trust that someone's gonna understand why you do what you do. Not a long time. You do need to gain their trust, I think.
Mhm.
So
Yeah. I think for this particular person too, I think that's part of it is like getting into just sharing that I'm not here to judge her. Like I'm not mad about what she eats. I'm curious and then we can build from there and evolve. But I think, yeah, it's hard for people to trust anyone else, especially if they're not trusting themselves with what they're eating and their habits. And our culture is just very prone to like making you feel guilty for everything or a lot of it.
yeah. Okay.
Yeah,
Other questions you want to ask about? So we talked about structure and how long it takes and how your process is going to be very distinct to you. And there are also, I don't know your topics, but there's also just inherently, you probably want to do X before you do Y.
mhm.
Like I don't know if I always like to move from to build on concepts, so you have to
Mhm.
think of what the inherent logic is to the concepts you're trying to talk about.
That's a good reminder for me is to, yeah, create that foundation and then continue to build from there. Do you create outlines for yourself or how do you kind of bring in that structure and make sure the sequencing that you do in a class or in the course of over the course of a semester?
Well, we haven't talked about the actual how do you structure a class period, and
Yeah.
that's kind of different because like when you're dealing with a class period, you have to think about what's the hardest thing I'm going to do today?
Mm.
Where in the term does it fall? Like how much energy are they probably going to have? And what do they need besides content related? Like, do they need to complain or do they need to get to know one another again? Or do they need to just, sometimes I'll have people just like, if we use your example of the food journal, I'll be like, let's just look at it and just fill in spaces that you've not had time to really describe. So sometimes the space is just a space to catch up. And but this like it's like the sequence is important. So I don't know if you'll remember this, but I'm sure we talked about this. So there's a old Soviet Russian film theory that says that you should take into consideration the length of a shot, the movement within the shot, and the emotional connection that the viewer has with the shot. And I think that is a good guidance for a class. How long should you do something? How
Mm.
much motion should there be, external and internal? And then emotionally, you don't ever want to do something that's intense for the entire class because it's too much. But,
Mm.
so you want to do some things that are not that intense, and then either work up to something intense or work away from something that's intense. So I think you can't do a really long thing and a really long thing. I don't think that works. So
Mhm.
if you're going to do something that's really long, do a couple short things and then do the long thing, or break up the long thing with a couple short things. Just because, the way people are. Does that
Yeah,
make sense?
that absolutely makes sense. And it makes me think of the way that you would talk about sentence structure too, and not to have these long rambling sentences, like maybe have one, but then
Right,
break it
right.
up with something short and punchy and precise.
Right, right. A short, very short sentence can be just as powerful as a really elaborate, sophisticated sentence. And so,
Yeah.
and then obviously you want to be very flexible and spontaneous when it comes to the structure for the class, because you may get in there. Like sometimes I'll write out something the night before and then I'll get into the group and I'll be like, that I can just tell it's not going to work. Like, I don't know what I was thinking, but this is a ridiculous idea. Like they're not ready for this or they don't want to do this. Like, why do I think they'd ever want to do this?
Yeah.
So then you have to pivot and do something different.
Do you keep all those like little tangents, all those little pieces in a document or something? I feel like
It has to be in your head. Like the structure of, okay, we'll do this, we'll start here, we'll do that, we'll do this. That initial structure is written down, but then you know what you actually do. I mean, I'm sure there's a musical or theatrical equivalent to this. Like there's the structure, like with a play, there's the dialogue, but what you do with the dialogue and how long you stretch out a scene, that's up to you guys. And every theater company will do it differently. So I do the dialogue. My equivalent to the dialogue is I'll sketch, I want to do this and this and this. And then once I get with the people, you know, it kind of just depends on that group.
yeah, that reminds me, kind of circling back to something else you mentioned, like sometimes people just need to get to know each other better. I'm curious what role you find community is in learning and in the classroom dynamic.
So it's dependent on the class and like so for writing 115, community is much more important than writing 122. Writing 122, there are a lot of students who they're pretty close to the end of their thing at PCC. They want to do well in the class. They're mostly nervous about getting into like nursing or wherever they were going to go, they're focused a lot on the future. Whereas writing 15 people, it's usually their first term of college. They don't even know if they should be there. And they need to feel at home on campus. So that group community is much more important. So ask yourself, like, who are these people? And, you know, are they like busy? Like some people work. First of all, they're spending their valuable, not that large salary on classes. And so you have to be respectful of that. Because they're going to be like, am I really spending money to sit and chat with this person I don't even like, you know? So they have to feel like they're getting what they want. So it's super dependent.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think that reminds me just of class you taught once about tone and just noticing the tone in a piece of writing and kind of picking up on unsaid cues. Like I remember you had a note, I think it was from a friend, or maybe you wrote it to
Oh
a
yeah,
friend, I
yeah,
don't
yeah, yeah, yeah. It
remember.
was like a note. Yeah, yeah. I
And it was
remember.
just, there was like some underlying like sharpness
Right,
to
right,
it.
right.
And
Yes.
we were just kind of dissecting it in the class. And it was an interesting exercise. I'm curious, like, what you, how do you encourage people to work with tone and to work with that critical thinking and notice what's said that's unsaid?
Well, Sarah, this is the sort of like the depressing part. Like critical thinking, teaching it 20 years ago was hard, but I could see if I was consistently working on it, I could see people's skills improving. I think in 20 years, certain things have gotten culturally where we are in history, some things have gotten easier. Like people actually write on the sentence level better than they did 20 years ago. They read abominably now. They can't
Mhm.
read to save their lives, or they don't want to read. I can't figure out which it is. They don't want to and they can't do it. And then the critical thinking is just, it's gotten really bad. We
Mhm.
we're in such a polarized time period that it's really hard because you have to be self-critical as well. So you have to
Mhm.
think like, what are my own assumptions and biases? And if you're going to look at someone else's biases and assumptions, you have to think about your own and where they match up and where they depart. And I think there's a real reluctance to even acknowledge that what you believe has limits and blind spots. You know, people have I think a hard time saying that now. Being right is very, very important. So I do a little bit of critical thinking, not enough, and it doesn't stick. And it's something, you have to pick your battles. And because I think reading is, I spend a lot of time getting them to read. And that's become more of a focus. Whereas before, I could kind of assume you guys read fairly well and would read what I assign. No way. I mean, they fight tooth and nail now. They find all these tricky ways not to read.
That's so funny. I wonder, what is that about?
It's about phones and
Mm,
internet articles and people's, so they're so distracted and unable to focus
mhm,
overall that it's, I don't know. And there's this weird thing. This was present before, but it's gotten 10 times worse. People say to me, well, if it's not something I'm interested in, and they're not interested in that, it's very narrow what they're interested in. So I'm like, well, wait a second. You're in school. Shouldn't you be like trying to broaden your horizons? Like, they're like, if I'm not interested in it, then it's really hard for me to read it. And I, I don't know. I find it really bizarre. It's more
Yeah.
prevalent, that sentiment, than it used to be.
Yeah, I could see that. I feel like our culture has been shifting more towards like this extreme of like just black and white. There's very limited, like, there's no liminal space anymore. It's like it's this way or it's this way, and it
Right.
can't be anything in between. And I
Right.
can see how that makes people less likely to try something new or to look at something new. There's this idea that a more sophisticated eye is less likely to deem something as good or bad and just notice it, just to notice it without passing any kind of judgment and just to
Yeah.
take
Yeah.
it for what it is. And I think, yeah, it's interesting to resist reading in that way.
Yeah. All that stuff I think is true, and it won't stay true. I mean, we're always moving through time. And so I'm hoping that people will, and like we changed how we put people in writing classes. And it used to be they had to take this very simplistic, faulty test in order to get placed. So now that basically they've let people place themselves, and they see that, and the people who really push for that see this as a very progressive move. But I knew, because you're dealing with humans, I was like, you know what? So I have tons of people who sign up for Writing 115 who shouldn't be there, who, because they get to make the choice, they underestimate their abilities, and they're actually slowing their progress down because of their
Mm-hmm.
own overly cautious nature. And if something had told them, like, go to Writing 121, they would just have automatically done that, you
Mm-hmm.
know? And so I'm like, but they didn't, I knew that from the outset, but they didn't ask when they were implementing it. They were very guarded. They were like, we're going to, there's people fighting this, and we're going to do it the way we want to do it, rather than invite, like, okay, what's the critique of this idea that we have? That people aren't open to hearing the critiques of what they want to do
Mm-hmm.
at PCC anymore. And so everyone's very guarded. And I'm like, guys, like, the best idea that will come out of a group is if you hash it out with the group members,
Mm.
you
Yeah.
know?
To have
So
that kind of struggle and like work through and have that resolution, I could
yeah.
see.
And I mean, they think that we're just a bunch of, like, reactionary that will hamper any progress. So I understand why they want to push things through, but
Mm.
I think there's a way to do it where you listen to what people really have to say, change things, and then make it better.
Mhm.
So
Yeah, that's really interesting that people would underestimate their abilities. I would have thought it would be the opposite, but I guess maybe there's also a benefit to being in a class that's easier than rather than more challenging.
but it depends on, like, Sarah, the very first term, it probably was the second year I ever taught before I even got here. I had people choose their own grade.
Mhm.
Like, you get to decide. I was like, this is radical. I don't even have to, like, you decide. Well, I noticed, I was like, the people who are choosing to give themselves A's are like the lazy butts, and the people who are choosing to give
Mhm.
themselves B's are really the people who worked harder and are better skilled, you
Mhm.
know, and not across the board. There are
You're right.
exceptions, but I was like, this sucks. Like, you know, and it was just the history that you bring with you is going to help you make that decision of where you want. And it wasn't accurate. I was like, none of this is accurate. Like, so I changed. I was like, no, I'm going to decide because I think I can say more objectively than you can subjectively what you deserve in this class. It was the worst. So, I don't know.
I love the idea of it though, because I think grading in the creative realm, like that was another thing that really turned me off from teaching is having to grade people for their art. It just was soul sucking to me. And
Yeah,
I really didn't like having to tell people like that piece is an A and that piece is a C. And I just based it more off of time and effort rather than ability and final execution, because some people are just better at drafting and drawing and replicating an image
yeah,
versus other people don't have the same skill set yet. And so,
Yeah, yeah. Well, the thing is, I think where I'm at now, like 20 years later, is I pay less attention to the letter grade and more attention to the feedback.
mm-hmm.
Feedback no one will ever know. But I can say, like, come on, like there's nothing original in this at all. I
Yeah,
can still give you an A because that's for other people over there. And they it's important that they admit, yeah, I didn't really even try to be original. Like I
mhm.
think that's something you want people to recognize. I think
Yeah. Oh, definitely. I
like
mean, I think that's the more important thing. Like I mean, I would spend so much time like writing these critical analysis and then nobody would even read it.
no, they have to read it. But like I don't know if you remember that at the end of the year they have this student art show. And I always go and I go through the art gallery and I'm like, God, why do most of these things suck? They're so and there has to be a reason, and I'm like, I don't there's something about the process that didn't get the student to the point where they could create the art that they were capable of. Let me say something that's actually, this is like, I think it's important because we haven't said it,
Yeah.
that whatever you're teaching, whatever it is, it's almost secondary to what's going on between you and the student.
Mm,
And the connection that you have with the student is, for me, the primary thing. Like we could be talking about, pasta, but if I feel like we're you feel comfortable enough to come and talk about stuff other than pasta if you need to,
hmm
then that's really what teaching is about.
mm,
Like so there's the
yeah.
topic and that just like I have to get out there that the relationship you form with the students is the most important thing. And it in some ways it doesn't matter what you teach.
That's so helpful. I always felt like in your classes, I just felt very seen and acknowledged and respected and challenged a little bit. Like you were always like, you can do better than this. And I'm like,
Yeah.
but that would be hard.
Yeah. But I don't know if you remember, like when we were in Italy, I think we went to a Chinese restaurant.
Uh-huh.
I, and it was just like you and I just chatting, and we went for
Yeah.
dinner or lunch or something. And to me, that was like really important. Like it was really important. And then I think there was four of you that I had back to the flat, like, I don't know, maybe like two of the Megans and Kira and you,
Yeah. Uh-huh.
and that's the essence of the teacher-student relationship.
Yeah.
So I think that just has to be said.
Yeah. I think that is profound. And I have to remember that in my connections, I think with my clients too, because I feel like there's a little bit of like a teacher role with working with clients and like kind of coaching them with health stuff. And so, yeah, I think I need to remember it's less about what I say and more about just people feeling seen and acknowledged.
And also, like, whether we get this food thing down right or not, like, you care about them in a bigger way.
Yeah.
Like someone could eat crap for the rest of their life and you still care about them. I
Yeah.
think that because, you know, most people can't break bad habits.
Hmm.
They don't. I mean, let's be real. They
Yeah.
carry those bad habits to the grave. And so, but loving those people, that, I think that's the most important thing.
Yeah, I think that's true. Like I'm still a very lazy writer, but you're still talking to me. So
Hey, well, we have to have a whole other conversation where we don't talk about these things and we just catch up. But
definitely. Is there
um,
anything else you want to touch on? I'm curious if I know for years I've been like, Bryan, when's your book coming out? Are you We're gonna
Yeah,
write a
see,
book
I
about
don't,
teaching.
my bias, my assumption is that there are a lot of good books because I can never read enough. I know there are a lot of good books because I have stacks everywhere of things I want to read, but I don't think there are that many good teachers. I
Mhm.
think there's a dearth of really good teachers, and so I would prefer for a little while longer to just put most of my energy into teaching.
Yeah.
And then when I'm not, and then I'm retired, then okay, then writing can maybe take a center stage. But I think the world needs writers not as much as I need teachers right now.
Mhm.
But some people can do both. I mean, if you can do both, more power to you. They can do it simultaneously. I just can't.
Yeah. Do you ever feel like you've done enough? Because that's one thing I notice when I am teaching, I never feel like I've put enough into my teaching. And it's just like this relentlessly hungry
Yeah.
monster that I need to keep feeding. And I'm like, but it still needs
Yeah,
more.
yeah. It's the sad part because you always know like I could have done that
Mhm.
part so much better if I had had time or if I'd had the energy. And there are things that I've been wanting to get to all these years, and I'm like, I still don't teach that very well. That doesn't mean I don't teach a whole bunch of other things better, but that's just the nature. It's the sad part. But hey, it is. It's insurmountable what we have to do.
But thank you for doing it and for being there for people. And
Hey, well, thanks for still talking to me about
I
this.
love it. Yes.
Hey, it was so good to see
It's
you.
wonderful to see you, Bryan. Thank you so much.
Okay,
Have a wonderful week. We'll
you
talk to
too.
you soon. Take care. Thanks so much for being here. I hope you enjoyed this interview. Please be sure to share it with a friend or leave a review where reviews are found. And if you want more fun resources, you can join Patreon at patreon.com/time in the studio, where I have a bunch of handouts and recordings and videos and extended interview audio. And to sign up for my generally monthly newsletter, you can go to my website. It's www.aidazea.com. That's AIDAZEA.com. Thanks so much for being here, and may our efforts benefit all beings. Toodaloo.